Hi, and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to open up Rstudio for the first time and go over its interface and how to use all the different elements of it. So, to start off, you're going to go and find Rstudio and open it up. When you open Rstudio, this is what it should look like. My screen's going to look a little different from yours because I have a lot of data already loaded into R, so you shouldn't have anything in this window. So the first thing I want you to do is go up to File at the top, say New File, R Script. And that's just so I can talk about all the different sections of R today. So every time you work in Rstudio, you're going to have four parts of the screen. You've got the top left, which is your script, the bottom left, which is the console, the top right, which shows you all of your data and variables, and the bottom right contains a bunch of things, which I'll go over. So the number one most important thing I'm going to tell you is whenever you're writing code, you should always be writing in the top left in your script. So there are actually two places you can type code. You can type it into your script up here or the console. But if you type your code into the console, every time you restart Rstudio, it's going to be gone. So you're always going to want to type code, unless it's something very basic, into the script, because that way you can save it. So type here. That way you can say File, Save As, and you can save your script and then go back to it later. Saving your script creates an R file, but really it's just like a text file that you can go back to later and edit and run again. So that's why you always want to type in your script and never in your console for the most part. So I've shown you how to make a new script, but you can have multiple scripts open at once. So I can say File, New Script as well, and I can have multiple code files open up here. So that's where you'll be writing everything. Your console in the bottom left is where you can see the code running. So if I were to run 1 + 1 and run that, I would see down in the console it ran. That little blue arrow shows the line that I ran, and then that row shows the answer. And so you may be wondering what that little 1 is next to it, because the answer there is 2. So 1 represents the fact that 2 is the first number in that row. If I were to have a function that gave me multiple rows of answers, then that number would go up. It marks the position of that number in the answer. So you can see that my code line showed up blue here. That means that there were no errors in it and it was all okay. But if you type something that's incorrect that R doesn't recognize, like if I type my name and try to run that line, it doesn't know what that is because I haven't set that as anything. It doesn't mean anything to R. So if you ever see red text in that box, it means that something has gone wrong. So next, let's talk about the top right. This is where, and you can see that I've used R a lot for different projects. So all of these are data frames. All of this contains data that I've used before and saved into R. So you can see I have a lot. You won't have any when you first start. So one nice thing about this section is you can scroll down to the data frame that you might want to look at. You can click the little button there and you can see the variables that it includes, what type of variable they are, so there are numbers in this variable, and you can see the variables. And if you click on the name, you can view the data frame. So this was some data that I used a long time ago in a class. The other tab in this box is the history box. So this is all the code that you've run recently. Every time you close R, it'll ask you if you want to save this. And you can if you want to. I've never really gone back to look at this because, as I said before, we type all of our code into a script so that we can save that. And we don't have to rely on the history in order to find old data. But you can see I've decided to save a bunch. So that's what this is. And if you want to move something to the console, you have to select that line, say move to console, and then you can press enter from down there and run that line if you want to. So if I ran that line, that shows me a data set. And we're going to be using this one later on because it automatically comes with R. So the last segment I'm going to talk about is the bottom right. And I'm going to move it up a little bit. You can move around these panes if you want to see more of this, if you want to be able to see more of your script. So I'm going to move this over so we can look at this a little more. This contains a bunch of very important things we're going to talk about. So the one that I have up is the Help tab. And here's where you can look up any function in R. So if I wanted to look up, say, the mean function, and it'll suggest things. So those are all R functions that if I want to look at what's the mean function, I can click on that and it gives me a description of what it is, how to use it, and what all the elements within it mean and are. So that can be very useful if you have a very simple question about a function that you don't quite know. So we'll just move right to left here. The packages box is very important as well, and I'll talk about it in another video as well when I talk more in detail about packages. But this is where you can see what packages you have loaded, what's available to you. When you open R, it automatically loads certain packages for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And later on, we'll be adding more ourselves. So moving over to the Plots tab. So this is where when you write a line of code that creates a graph and you run it, this is where that graph is going to show up. And once you have a graph, you're going to be able to click Export, and you'll be able to save your graph as a PDF or a JPEG. In the Files tab, this is where you can go into your computer itself, find possibly Excel files that you want to download into R, and load them in. So that's a general walkthrough of Rstudio and all of its elements and how to look at it. A couple more things are some shortcuts. Up here in the left, you've got a way to make new files without going up into the file menu at the top of the screen. You're always going to want to make an R script. You can learn on your own how to make all of these different types of things, but they're slightly different. So we're always going to want to type in an R script. This is recent files, so you can see a bunch of stuff that I've done recently. And that's just an easy way to open stuff that you've been working on recently. That's obviously the Save button. This is your saving all the documents you have open. If you want to print. And then over here, you've got this Run button, which is if you want to run the line that your cursor is currently on. So if I put my cursor anywhere on this line, it could be in the middle, it could be at the end, and I click Run, it'll run it down here. And this is if I want to rerun the line that I just ran. So it runs that again. And you don't need to worry about this or this. So those are the basics of Rstudio. The most important thing to remember is you always write your code in a script, because otherwise you'll not be able to save it and go back to it. So in this lesson, we walked through Rstudio and all 4 of its windows and talked about how to find things within Rstudio and some basics of how to run your code. In the next video, we'll start in on some basic functions and talk about different types of data.